the FITSNews headquarters. This is our third installment of the month in review. It is live, so if we screw up, there's really not much we can do about it. But I am very into this format because it lets us dig deeper into these cases. It also lets us interact with you, our audience, the folks that are sending us questions about the stories we're covering in real time, not only here, but over the past few weeks as we've been covering all these stories. Obviously, we're going to start with the story that has captured the attention of the entire country, the story of the beautiful South Carolina pastor's wife, Micah Miller, whose suspicious suicide a month ago has just exploded. All sorts of coverage related to this story. And I want to start by singling out a couple folks on our media outlet that have done amazing work. Jen Wood, Callie Lyons, Andy Fancher, the three of you. I know you've been coming at this story from different angles, different perspectives, but the three members of this team on this story have done amazing work. It's not just them, though. A ton of outlets have been covering this story incredibly well. National media outlets, News Nation, for example, local media, TV stations, print, podcasters, bloggers, YouTubers. There's been a ton of attention on this story, and that is a good thing because, again, nobody owns these stories. These stories need to be told by as many people as possible. That's how we're going to get to the truth. But Jen, before we get into the truth or what we know of it about Micah Miller and what befell her a month ago, I want to ask you, why has this story blown up? What is driving all of the interest and attention on the Micah Miller story?
I think that can be attributed to her estranged spouse, J.P. Miller, Pastor J.P. Miller, and his announcement of her death the day after she died at the end of a very normal, otherwise normal Sunday sermon. When you got that, I believe you got that Thursday after it happened. So, she died on Saturday. He did the sermon on Sunday. You got that video sent to you on Thursday, and we all watched it, and our jaws kind of dropped. What were your thoughts the first time you heard that video?
Oh, I mean, that was the first of what has been a parade of red flags on this guy. I think I said the other day that it was like one of those Tiananmen Square Chinese Communist Party parades. There's so many red flags going by with this guy. But yeah, I mean, first of all, he tells his congregation, don't talk about this. It's kind of like at the end of a sermon, like, oh, by the way, I've got this big announcement, but don't talk about it. Leave the church in silence. Don't talk about it. Yeah, my wife died. And it was just the way he said it. And then I tell you, Jen, everything we've seen from this guy, and folks are actually talking about a TikTok interview apparently he gave last night. I haven't seen that yet, but I've seen a few of his interviews. I've seen a ton of this guy's sermons, and obviously we saw the memorial service that he gave in the aftermath of his wife's death, where he talked about laying with her body, trying to raise her from the dead. I mean, it was just, and the other thing is all about him. That was the other thing that kind of struck me.
I think that is something that's become very clear in the days and weeks after the story broke. I'm no psychologist, but I see a lot of tendencies of a very narcissistic person who likes to control the situations he's in, like telling the congregation that they can't discuss it afterwards.
Yeah, and he wrote her obituary too that portrayed him as, the best pastor, the funniest pastor ever, and that they had this perfect relationship. But it became pretty clear, Jen, in the immediate aftermath of Micah's death becoming public. Again, FITSNews was the media outlet that first broke this story. But after that sort of snowball started rolling down the mountain, we started seeing a lot of reports, not only from family members of Micah Miller, but folks within the church who knew the couple. And we started to see this other side of Pastor John Paul Miller, that abuse, harassment, stalking, putting razor blades on her tires, allegedly, just crazy behavior. And obviously the real red flag that kind of got folks really tuned into this was when we learned that Micah Miller had filed for divorce just 12 days before her death, and that John Paul Miller had been served those papers 2 days, less than 2 days, before she died. Jen, let's talk just a little bit. And I know we've covered so much of this on FITSNews.com, so much of the immediate aftermath of this, but the case has been ruled a suicide. And again, at this point, we have nothing concrete to dispute that. However, and it's a big however, there are all these inconsistencies, irregularities, questions swirling around the relationship. Right now, Jen, what is your biggest unanswered question as it relates to the conclusion of a suicide in this case?
Well, I know that Robeson County did provide a presentation detailing their investigation. And to me, the presentation is great. And like Andy said, it is a lot more than you usually get from a police department when you request, documentation following an incident. It was substantial, but there were a lot of areas in between, the points of her last day that think I think that's why so many people have questions about her suicide. It doesn't make any sense. And to me, it looked like when she was leaving her apartment that morning, she had her shirt on and she had every intention of going to her work.
Yeah, she had her work outfit on, her work uniform. She was
r-
leaving at the time you would leave if you were going to go to your work. I think she was supposed to report at noon. She was leaving the apartment at 11:38.
So
She was going to work.
what happened between the point when she left her apartment and she turned into the Dick's Pawn Shop parking lot and purchased a gun?
Hmm.
Um, Her phone records, were there any calls? Were there any texts? Did she find something on the car? Was there somebody following her? Something changed the course of that day for her. I don't think she woke up with that intention based on conversations that I have had with her friends, her close friends, conversations that I have seen her family do. She had plans for that Sunday. She had plans to meet a friend the next week. She had made hair appointments. Her taxes had just been paid. So to me, that is my biggest question.
Yeah, what happened? What was it that happened when she left the apartment that day
Mhm.
to turn that day into not only a different day, but obviously her last day among us? Jen, the other thing that we've been digging into, and I want to talk about this a little bit because we got a ton of response on the site. I did a column. I was actually advised. My wife crunches the numbers here, folks, and she always advises me, maybe you don't want to do that, maybe you don't want to write that. But I did write a column about these sort of, and again, it's not a denominational issue, it's not an organized religion issue, but I did write a column talking about these churches that are driven by these big personality pastors who make it about them, who kind of twist the scriptural references to fit their pursuits. But Jen, do you think this was the Solid Rock Church? Do you think that this was a cult? Was it a cult of personality for J.P. Miller? If not,
I
I mean, what's
hate
your
to call it that because I have talked to a number of very wonderful people who did attend the church and no longer attend the church, they were attending it for the right reasons. They, uh, wanted to feel closer to God. They, felt compelled by, his sermons. But I also think that in the aftermath of Micah's death, his sermons took a new tenor. So I spent hours going through his past sermons, which are all available on YouTube. Um, and
lucky you?
yeah, lucky. Thank you. Thank you. I actually think it may be worse than Alex Murdoch's jail calls. I'm not going to lie. But yeah, I mean, once you look at the things that he was saying and look at the events in his life that were happening, his separation from Micah, his when Micah was committed to the mental health facility involuntarily, and his sermons, shortly before or after those, um, they directly relate to his life, and he used his pulpit as a weapon. He used it to, control her and control people. He would. I saw an interview with one individual who said that he, they had had a disagreement, and the next day he was, at the lectern talking about that disagreement and disparaging her in church. And it's just, I think that things became a lot clearer to people in the aftermath of Micah's death. So yeah, I mean, yeah, it feels very cultish. I don't think everybody there is like that, but I think that was absolutely John Paul Miller's intention. Control.
Well, we're getting a lot of folks talking about, slimy preacher. A lot of folks in the comments section weighing in. One of the folks did point out, though, talking about what we were referencing earlier. This was Amber saying that people generally don't make plans for the following day and then go unalive themselves. That's very true. Jen, let me ask you this, and I want to kind of weave this into what we're talking about because you've been doing a lot of work into the finances of this church, a lot of research into John Paul Miller's intermingling personal business finances with the church, and there's been speculation. Uh, I'll sum it up with a question: what did Micah Miller know about the finances of this church? And so, let me ask you this: what have you uncovered that gives you some cause for pause regarding this angle of the story?
Yeah, I mean, first, I think it's important to remember that when Micah was involuntarily committed to a mental health facility by John Paul in February, while she was there, he took all of her electronic devices, which she had been documenting things in preparation for the divorce filing. So to me, I think it's very indicative that she was poking around. She was asking questions. She knew something was not right. And her friends and family have, said the same thing. I'm not the only one that thinks that. So I think that that's important. But then, you look at some of the things that happened, over the past year. For example, he transferred the deed for his home out of his name to the church's name. Which, I've talked to quite a few attorneys and said that it looks like he was concealing assets under the church to, in preparation for divorce. And that happened in the fall, after she filed for divorce the first time. So, moving the asset, his primary asset tied to his name to the church, that is to me suspicious. I want to know more. I'm pretty sure others do as well. Um, there's a private plane that he mentions was donated to the church by somebody so that he could fly to other states and spread his good word. That private plane does exist. It was transferred over to the church after Micah's death. Um, I have not confirmed this, but there's rumblings. Was it really donated, or did the church purchase it?
Hmm.
So, in the property that they recently purchased for the school that they were building, the property was sold at a loss by an LLC in prime market conditions.
It's always in the
Uh,
property records, isn't it, Jen?
it's always every time. I tell people that every time. It's always in the property records. So that I think they bought it for $680,000. The value listed on it in the register of deeds is like 2 million. It is
Wow.
makes no sense. It could make sense once we get into it, but it's certainly things that we're looking at because obviously she had information that he did not want her to have. She was asking questions he did not want to answer.
Hmm. Well, we hope to learn more. Obviously, there's a big hearing this coming week in Horry County, South Carolina, family court hearing. We are still awaiting details on whether or not that's going to be public. Obviously, there's no minors. That shouldn't be an issue. But we're obviously waiting on some information there. That's going to be a hearing over the battle over her, I guess, effects, what was
Mhm.
found on her person at the time she died. Obviously, we know John Paul Miller has already been in the apartment where she was staying to presumably, I don't know what was going on in there. We're going to have to find that out at some point. But Jen, let me ask you this: as we think about getting answers to some of these questions, and by the way, you were mentioning these interesting financial moves at the church. The lawyer involved there, isn't he the guy that has the property that runs up against the Lumber River, about a half,
Yes. Yes.
7 miles as the crow flies downstream from where her body was found? Is that accurate?
Yes,
So
is 100% accurate. That has been pointed out. That has been speculated. Whether or not that entire stretch of the Lumber River is wholly navigable,
boy, you
you can
said
get a
that
boat up it.
brilliantly.
I knew,
That's
like,
one of
I
my
could,
words.
like, when it was, like, in my head, coming to my mouth, I knew it was gonna come out right, but whether or not he could have gotten a boat up there, or whether somebody could have
Mm.
gotten a boat up there in the time frame required, um, is
But
questionable.
here's the thing, and again, this is what we do here. This is why I love this media outlet. We have these discussions, we entertain these theories, because again, this is not something that is we're not pulling this out of our backsides. This is people are talking about this all over the internet. But I want to also go back, telling the full story. This is a woman who was clearly
Mhm.
struggling. The videos that she posted, I mean, I think they're beautiful. I mean, I think they're, you watch them, you want to cry watching, because she's talking about the struggle and she's trying to help other people that are dealing with what she's struggling with, and it's just incredibly inspiring. But you also wonder, did that struggle ultimately end on that day with a conscious decision? I just can't do this
Right.
anymore. And
Right. I mean, and I do, and Andy and I discuss this a lot, and I know he got a lot of crap for that weekend review that we did together. And just to be fair, I wanted him to push back on me.
yeah,
That is what I asked him to do going into that.
yeah,
Because I think the other
you don't have to
opinion that,
ask him twice either.
yeah, no, and he's like, yeah, let's go. But yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, do you think that it's fair pushback? Her father was on News Nation and said that she was depressed. She was going through a lot, but he does not believe that she was so depressed that she would have unalived herself. So yeah, I mean, I think but I also think some of the stuff, there's a lot of theories out there. Some of them, do I think they're possible? No. Some of them I do have questions about. I do think that people are asking valid questions.
Speaking of one of those questions, Stan Fly in the chat wants to know: is JP remarried, or does he have a new girlfriend yet? Well, guess what's or Stay Fly? I'm sorry, Stay Fly. Um, Jen, you want to take that one?
You know what? Unless I hear it from JP Miller himself, I cannot confirm or deny it, but he has been seen out with Susie Skinner, who was a close friend of theirs for years. There allegedly was an affair. Whether or not that is true, I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would all be speculation on my part. But yeah, he has been seen out with another woman since. But
Well, we're hoping to get answers this coming week on this story. Obviously, it's one that so many people have focused on. And I got to tell you, Jen, not since the Murdochs has there been just sort of I mean, people from all over the state. I had a friend from Utahville the other day down in Orangeburg saying that one of their family members was just obsessed with this case. And it does have all of those elements, but also we got to remember it's a tragedy. We just got to find out why the tragedy happened and try and get answers
right.
as much as possible. And also, before we move off of the John Paul Miller story, I also want to congratulate Callie for the work she did in digging on his father, because this is a guy, his father, I mean, similar narcissistic tendencies, would you say, Jen? Similar scandals?
One, yeah, but similar scandals, but going back a lot longer.
Yeah, this was a guy that came up with Jim and Tammy Faye Baker. He was at the center of the big split of their church
Yeah, he
when
had a Marian Bible College, and he was indicted and pled guilty to charges of using international students on visas as slave laborers, basically.
men of
So yeah,
God,
I mean,
gotta love them.
yeah, there's a lot of sketchy stuff going on,
Well,
and
and
we're digging into some more of those allegations still.
I was going to point that out. Our Cali Lions has been digging deep on Pastor J.P. Miller's father, Reg Miller. Some details of some stories. We've already referenced them in previous coverage on FITSNews, but
And
Callie is
I
digging
think
deep.
she's been amazing. And I think the other thing that's important is I guess I didn't realize when I started this story that there are a lot of individuals out there whose loved ones have been in a domestic violence situation and died by suicide, and they have questions. They
Yeah,
can't get answers because the next of kin is, the person who's getting the investigative results, the person who's getting the effects after the investigation's closed, is the spouse.
Yeah.
It's the next of kin. So I am doing a follow-up story on another family that reached out in very similar circumstances as Micah Miller's family. And just some of the parallels that I'm seeing in a lot of these cases that I've found.
Well, we will be covering that court hearing next week in Horry County. Hopefully, they will let us into that hearing. In South Carolina, unfortunately, it is hit or miss whether or not you get into a courtroom and what you're allowed to do once you get in there. But we submit that paperwork before all of these hearings. We did it countless times covering the Murdaugh case. We'll be doing it again next week in Horry County. Jim, before we move off this, where do you see this story going? Is it more investigating questions about Micah's death? Is it more digging into the finances of the church? I mean, what's your take on that?
I don't know that the story is necessarily going to have one of those endings where it's tied up in a bow and somebody ends up in jail and there's a clear cut answer. But I do see a lot of movement towards, you know, s- some changes in how these situations are handled. I could see there being a potential wrongful death suit filed against the church for the things Micah was experiencing in the months leading up to her death, which I do think may end up bringing to surface a lot of the things we're questioning about the church's finances and activities with their ministries.
Well, and before we hop off, one little bit of news. I did speak with several of my federal sources who have been adamant from the beginning that they were not investigating Micah Miller's death. They wanted to make that very clear that federal assets were not probing the death of Micah Miller. But we have learned they are actively pursuing some of these leads regarding the finances of Solid Rock at Market Common. They are actively pursuing some of those leads. I wouldn't go so far as to call it an open investigation yet, but our sources say that interviews are definitely being conducted. And so we could have an announcement again within the next few weeks from the feds that they are indeed investigating JP Miller's church, which would be, again, along with that wrongful death suit, that would be a way to get some answers on this case. Jen, thank you so much for your work on this. And obviously, Callie, not on the show with us today, but Callie has done just incredible work on this. I can't say enough about the work Callie Lyons has done. Um, Wanted to pivot a little bit, Jen, because we've got folks that have been writing in asking as they've been following the Micah Miller saga. They've been digging our coverage. They've been going back to the Murdaugh stuff. Another little story we broke here on FITSNews back in June of 2021. But a lot of folks have been asking about the other true crime sagas that we're covering, and obviously there's a big one coming up. We thought it was going to be scheduled for next month. We've since found out it's not, but that's the retrial of Somerville jeweler Michael Colucci, uh, accused of killing his wife back in 2015 outside of a gold pawn shop that they ran down in Somerville. Jen, what's the status with this case? It's a retrial, correct?
Yeah, so it was supposed to begin, I think, almost 2 weeks ago, and they delayed it because I think once they got in all of their list of witnesses from the defense and the prosecution, they realized they hadn't docketed enough time. So that people were just saying that it's starting next month, but it sounds like it is not starting until the fall. It'll be an interesting trial. It's been quite a while since Sarah Colucci died. It is again one of those cases that's highly circumstantial. The first jury was hung and was declared a mistrial. So they're going back for another round, whether or not they have collected additional evidence or if they're taking a new angle, I'm not sure. Based on the pretrial motions that we were able to get when we thought that the trial was coming, um, it's interesting because it's one of those situations where there's a second trial and the defense kind of knows the offense's playbook, and they are,
That they do.
yeah, they are wisely using that advantage.
And just to show you how everything's connected in this story, the lead agent on the investigation, the lead state law enforcement division agent on the investigation into the Colucci murder, was also the lead agent in the Murdaugh murders. And so that's going to be interesting. David Owen, he did not fare well during the Murdaugh trial. It'll be interesting to see whether Andy Savage, the defense attorney for Michael Colucci, exploits that in this upcoming retrial this fall again. I suspect he will. And also, speaking of Andy Savage, for those of you who have followed our coverage of the investigation into Stephen Smith, he was the guy, the attorney for Stephen Smith's mother, Sandy Smith, who hired the PI that we think may have solved this case. But anyway, we're still waiting for some resolution on that case from SLED. But we got another comment here. I wanted to read this. It was interesting. Our friend Stay Flyman, he's dominating the comments here, but I'm digging it. He asked, and I want to read this question in full because it leads into something. Whatever happened with the pianist and buggery case with the murdered vet tech? And if you read that, if you hear that comment, you think, wait a minute, what? Yeah, we've got all that. This is the Rose Petal murder, another big story that FITSNews has been driving. And if you go on our homepage right now, FITSNews.com, scroll down to the middle of the page there, you will see a huge banner, Rose Petal murder. Just click on that. You can get caught up to speed on that entire case. But we've covered some crazy stuff. I don't think any case gets crazier than Rose Petal. Am I wrong?
No, absolutely not. And it's one of those cases where it's not typical because your victim ended up not being quite so sympathetic in the end due to the allegations of child sexual abuse.
I'm just told Stay Fly wants to make clear she's a female. So there we go. She's
There you go.
staying fly.
I was going to tell you.
I'm digging it. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, Christina Parcell, 42-year-old mother, found murdered in October. Everybody thought that it was going to be a clear, open and shut case, with her, the father of her child who they've been fighting with for custody over.
Everybody thought he did it.
Her boyfriend, who, in the aftermath ended up, after her murder, ended up getting arrested for child sexual abuse.
And buggery.
The
abominable crime
do
of
not
buggery.
Google that, whatever you do. I had no clue what that meant when I first took on the story. Now I know.
You'll regret it.
Yeah, big regrets. And then they arrested Zach Mello, a concert pianist who went to Juilliard and
Zach Hughes, you mean?
Yeah, arrested, and he's currently in jail awaiting trial. That's the big trial that we're waiting for. I think, it's just one of those cases that the more we uncovered information, the more we covered it, the weirder it got.
Yeah. Well, again, if you haven't checked it out yet, FITSNews.com, just scroll down the middle of the page. We got a big banner up on that Rose Petal murder. It is going to be one of the wildest trials that we've ever covered. And again, that one's going to be in the fall as well. So we're going to have a lot of stuff hitting here in the fall on the true crime front. But I wanted to bring Andy Fancher and our top reporter, Andy Fancher. You were covering, obviously, the Micah Miller stuff with Jen, and we were talking earlier about some of these stories that we cover. But I wanted to ask you, we know the old expression, snitches get stitches, right? But in Walterboro, South Carolina, it is appearing as though a far worse fate is befalling some folks. And we've got some reports. And again, Andy, I want you to, because you always bring it home for us, Andy. We hear all this stuff. We explore all these angles. Andy is a just the facts dude here. So, Andy, let's start with that triple homicide in Walterboro, South Carolina from earlier this month. What do we know about that story, Andy?
Sure. So, as you identified, snitches get stitches, or perhaps in Walterboro, they get dismembered into suitcases or shot up in triple homicides. It all depends at the discretion of the person on the other end. But yes, so to go into brevity on this triple homicide in Colleton County, I mean, yes, we have 3 victims that have been identified at this time. You can see here, I'm actively waiting for more receipts to come in on separate cases. So as you can see, they're hitting me up now. But yeah, so here we've got this triple homicide in Colleton County. We've got 3 victims ranging from, ages 3 to 49 at a home that was not the victim's home. The victim of the many was housekeeping for an elderly couple who are prior USPS employees. And here we've got this horrific shooting, must have been on May 22nd, I believe, is when investigators were deployed to this residential home. I mean, within that weekend, we have the sheriff's office identifying vehicles of interest, or at least one, a singular vehicle of interest, a Cadillac that was subsequently found over in a very gang-addled area, a territory that we're told belongs to the Sand Hill Boys, singular hill. I must clarify that. But yes, I mean, is that of any relation to the woman who was found in a suitcase in a truck in a barn just a mile or two away from that? It remains unclear. That's a separate investigation. That's a separate agency leading that investigation. We can say that both of these incidents that purportedly have some underlying snitch theme are being investigated by the agencies out that way. We've got Walterboro PD and Carlton County Sheriff's Office looking into both of those incidents at this time.
Well, this isn't the only very suspicious drug-related murder or kidnapping or potential snitch situation we're dealing with. We've got FITSNews this past month, back in April, covered the story of a woman who was found bound near death at a boat landing on the Coosahatchee, bordering the Hampton and Jasper counties. This was woman zip tied, we were told. Just horrific. They transported her to a hospital. She was in very bad shape. She has survived, but shortly afterward, there were 3 individuals arrested. But Andy, we got to update this week. There was another arrest in this case.
Correct. I mean, this is a case of just monumental proportions here. I mean, what we have learned from the moment this woman was found, as you identified, I mean, pulverized and bound behind her back at this remote boat landing in Jasper County, the Corner Lake boat landing. As you initially reported, actually first reported on our outlet, there was a magnificent police presence at about 3 o'clock that afternoon on April 3rd, which led to a myriad of rumors online, some of them credible, others we have determined to be not. But what we know now is that at least 4 individuals were involved in a cross-county kidnapping that ended in Jasper County. It did not occur in Jasper County. It occurred over in Barnwell. And according to investigators, again, after what we've deduced looking at this for approximately 2 months, is that this woman who, while the investigators were not going to identify, has actually, breaking news to all of us, she has come out on Facebook. We have reached out to her. She commended the Jasper County Sheriff's Office, JCSO, for saving her life.
Wow.
And we have since reached out. So we are pending a response in the event she does want to. Of course, we would not hold it against her if she doesn't. But nonetheless, what we know from State Law Enforcement Division, SLED, is that 4 individuals were purportedly responsible for kidnapping her in Barnwell, transporting her approximately 74 miles to the Corner Lake boat landing, in which 2 individuals were thereafter transported to the Augusta International Airport, where I believe, was it 42-year-old man helped 2 suspects abscond approximately 1,000 miles north to Knoxville County, Illinois. That is where the U.S. Marshals, some 8 days after the kidnapping, apprehended Jamal Riley, who is a man with many priors, and we've got Caleb Bostic, who's 4 years older than him. They were both apprehended by the U.S. Marshals up there in Illinois. They have since been transported back to South Carolina. There was a 3rd accomplice, Miss Adrienne Ginn. To what degree she played in the kidnapping, it remains unclear, but she was arrested, I think, within 3 days of the kidnapping for a totally unrelated charge, driving under suspension by U.S. Highway Patrol. And then you're right, come just the other day, I mean, here we are, it's, I think, Tuesday before last, we've got another arrest in this case. We've got what's this fella's name? Marquise Smith. Marquise Smith is the man who is at least suspected of traveling these 2 suspects, at least 2 of them that later absconded, to that airport in Georgia. And I mean, this is an insane case. We put out a very sweeping report on this late last month, where we identified upon some of the suspects' own submissions, their gang affiliations with the G-Shine set of the Blood Street Gang. I mean, hell, we've got Jamal Riley posting on Facebook while he's incarcerated, trying to appeal a separate burglary kidnapping charge back in 2012, I believe, representing his set, posing with colored bandanas and flags, advocating literally for, quote, Mo murder, Mo homicide. These are the suspects.
Yeah. And you know, the other interesting thing, Andy, you know, we got a few warnings back when we covered this was last year when we covered the unconstitutional release of a gang leader from a South Carolina prison, Jared Price. This is a guy that was sentenced to a mandatory minimum of 35 years. He was set free with a decade and a half left on his sentence due to a secret backroom deal between a retiring judge and a powerful lawyer legislator. Folks, this was a case study for everything that's wrong with the so-called justice system in South Carolina. But at that time, a couple folks warned us, hey, you better be careful covering this. This is a pretty powerful gang. These are pretty powerful people. And, you know, that of course, to us is just like a light to a moth. You know, we're just like, okay, really? You know, but in this same case, Andy, we've also received some warnings. We won't go into who warned us or what they specifically said, but we've been told to be careful with this case. But that doesn't ever stop us, does it?
No, I mean, as you identified, yes. I mean, we've had multiple people from various corners of the state warn us about this particular case. I mean, as again, Mr. Terrell Riley identified himself. He is an active member of a notorious street gang. He has got ink on his chest. He's got flags on his Facebook page.
No ink on your chest, Andy?
Not on my chest. I'm a blank canvas.
Dylan,
no affiliation.
No, but there are a bunch of people here asking an interesting question, which, you know, we obviously got the gang connections here. There are some folks in the comments are wondering, do we know the motive and the tie of why this victim was victimized?
That's an excellent question.
And I will state there are rumors in the ether, but that is all they are at this time, rumors as to what happened that led to this.
Nothing reportable at this time.
Nothing reportable at this time.
Well, I want to move. By the way, Andy, excellent work on all these stories. You've been breaking these stories. You've been following up. You've been not only following up, you've been holding the law enforcement agencies that are investigating them accountable as well, which is another important part of what we do at FITSNews. By the way, if you hadn't followed Andy on Twitter, Real Andy Fancher, he is covering those corrupt cops. Badges gone bad. That's what we call it here at FITSNews.
Yes.
Badges gone bad. So if you know one of those stories, get in touch with Andy, DM on Twitter, or email him at andy@fitsnews.com. But I wanted to pivot here. There was another story of a shooting in Walterboro this past week that made national news, but it wasn't so as far as we know anyway, a gang shooting. They were calling it the Hood Monkey story for a while. But this was the story of Bradley, a 15-year-old Japanese, I'm going to say this correctly, macaque. That's a primate. It's
How were you saying it?
we're not going to discuss how I was saying it all week. Let's just say I got some bizarre looks around the office. I was not calling it macaque. I was pronouncing it vastly differently. But the biggest question we've been getting, other than what kind of monkey was this, was what happened to it, because earlier this week it was announced that Bradley had been reunited, reconnected, had been
Captured?
Captured and sent back to its owner. Now, Bradley was sent back to his owner, but not alive. The monkey was shot and killed. We reported exclusively earlier this week, in fact, that this monkey had allegedly threatened some dogs that were in the city of Walterboro, and that the owner had felt threatened and shot and killed the monkey. And so there has been an uproar on all these social media pages in Walterboro. And by the way, folks, if you hadn't followed social media in Walterboro, this was the place to go during the Murdaugh trial. everybody was following these Walterboro word of mouth. This was where all the breaking news on the Murdaugh trial was happening. So people were all over it. And in fact, some of the jury tampering allegations originated from Walterboro word of mouth that threw that historic verdict in jeopardy. They originated on this Facebook page. But
I have to say that is my favorite local Facebook group. They are fun.
But we can confirm that unfortunately Bradley the McCake, boy, I almost said it wrong there, has passed away. And as far as we know, there is no investigation into it because the county, which was assisting in trying to find this monkey, apparently they only know what the owner has told them about what happened to it. But why did it go after these dogs? We are told that Bradley, who escaped, by the way, 2 padlocks to get out, not 1 padlock. This guy went through 2. Had escaped once before, but the reason that he apparently did not like dogs is that there was a dog at his prior habitat that would steal his food, allegedly, according to our sources. So that is why the monkey or the macaque, boy, I almost messed up, had an aversion to dogs. But anyway, Jen, let's stay in Walterboro real quick. I wanted to ask you, everyone's talking about, there was a ton of news this past week about Becky Hill, and we exclusively reported last week that a decision had been made to refer many of the ethics investigations against Becky Hill to the Attorney General of South Carolina for criminal prosecution. But there are still a ton of ethics violations hanging out there. Jen, what is the latest on the story of Becky Hill, the embattled former clerk of court in Colleton?
So this week, the Ethics Commission announced that they did find, in review of this case, probable cause to hold a hearing, and that hearing is scheduled December 19th at 9:30 a.m. It is a while out there, but in their notice of hearing, they detailed all of these allegations. There are, I think, 74 allegations that they found probable cause to discuss.
Wait, there's one page missing in that thing, and there's 76, right? Wasn't there one page missing?
Oh yeah, you're right. Yes,
Yeah.
22. Yeah, it's 23 pages long. We're missing page 22. I checked all the other outlets; they don't have it either. So yes, 76. Yeah. So, in a lot of those allegations, aligned with what we had been reporting on, relating to, her knowingly using her position to direct a bonus to herself from the IVD child support funds for the county. The infamous picture of Alex Murdaugh in his jail cell during the trial. It appears that also made it in there. They don't detail what the picture was of, but it was of an inmate. I'm, logical deduction is that it's Alex.
Murdaugh,
yeah. She negotiated use of the courthouse in exchange for an interview to promote her book, and then it gets into a lot of checks that were directed to her for reimbursement of items that were not appropriate for reimbursement. So, like Mother's Day gifts and personal meals,
house cleaning.
There's we do have additional FOIAs out after receiving this this ethics commission document. So see what else we can find. But yeah, that's a lot of counts. Are all of them criminal? I'm not sure.
Becky Hill will be answering to those accounts. There's been a meeting of the State Ethics Commission scheduled for December of this year, where she will have to come and answer to those. Obviously, while they prepare for that hearing, the criminal investigation into her is ongoing. There's been allegations of obstruction of justice. There's been allegations of conspiracy, of perjury against Becky Hill in the aftermath. And again, most of these go back to alleged efforts to stay on top of these ethics investigations. So it's almost like criminal activity based on trying to keep ahead of the ethics case. So, she just kept getting worse for Becky Hill. I got an interesting question that a reader asked me on Twitter the other day, and I wanted to throw that in here. Who is Becky Hill's boss, And why are they not in trouble? Which I think is a very interesting question. Jen, who is Becky Hill's boss?
The State
Or
Ethics
who
Commission.
or who was her boss?
I mean, it looked to me based on, how the reporting of finances was done, county administration technically,
But they're not her
managed.
boss.
They're
Yeah,
not
she's
her boss.
independently elected. Yeah,
Right.
Dylan.
She's elected by the people. And that's the process that we're in the middle of, is that State Ethics Commission. They're reviewing these.
Absolutely. And again, the jury tampering allegation is still out there. It was determined, obviously, by former Chief Justice Jean Toll that Becky Hill's jury tampering did not rise to the level so as to warrant a new trial for Alec Murdaugh, but that doesn't mean that she didn't tamper. The other question that we're getting a lot related to Becky Hill, and I think this is a great question. How can Attorney General Alan Wilson prosecute Becky Hill when they used her and coached her to preserve their guilty verdict against Alec Murdaugh? That's Dylan, pretty good question.
Yeah, it's a really good question, because obviously his office had a real interest in minimizing how culpable she looked for potentially messing up the Murdaugh trial. So having them then have the obligation to have probably the same exact people press charges against her obviously would be questionable. That being said, in South Carolina, the Attorney General has the ability to take any case which is given to him, or any case that any other solicitor or prosecutor, DA, as you might call them in another state, has. So what I would assume that the AG's office will do in a situation like this, it seems to be their standard operating procedure, is to find another solicitor who doesn't have connections to the case, who will be able to independently prosecute it. But who knows, until they formally make that request, it is in the AG's hands. And Andy, I saw you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah,
a minute
Andy's got a
ago. We never
question.
got
He
around to
texted
it.
me.
I just had a very quick question here. So, I mean, as we exclusively reported, I mean, she resigned. I believe it was March of this year. And at her resignation, did one of our state representatives who's representing her not say that this resignation is not whatsoever related to any investigation, anything of that nature? She was doing it to spend more time with her grandkids. I mean, how have those statements aged, considering what we know now?
That is a very good question. We'll have to get our good friend Justin Bamberg on here. Now, to his credit, Bamberg didn't. It was Becky Hill that said she was going to step down to spend more time with her grandchildren. Which, by the way, I think that was the weakest invocation of "I'm going to spend more time with my family" that I've ever heard. I mean,
It was a weird press conference.
yeah, it was. But no, that's a good question, Andy. And I think one of the things that we're going to find out on this Becky Hill thing as it continues to unfold is not only what sort of criminal consequences is she going to be facing along with her son. And by the way, Andy, you're the one that first reported on her son, Colt, being arrested in connection with wiretapping a county official. And again, they were trying to keep ahead of that ethics investigation. That's why they were doing it. They were trying to keep ahead of it. But yeah, not only what is going to happen, but who's going to prosecute it? Because I don't think Alan Wilson can prosecute it. I really don't. I think he's got to farm this thing out and refer it to another solicitor. But
I feel like he knows that, though. I mean,
well, if he doesn't, he knows it now. So, but
Yeah.
yeah, I agree with you. I think he does. And you know,
Well,
this
I
is a
think
guy.
a golden rule here should be you can't prosecute your friends.
Well, you certainly shouldn't prosecute people that you coached to secure the biggest verdict your office has ever gotten. But hey, I mean, this is a guy, Alan Wilson. Let's be honest, he's not going to admit this for a while, but he's running for governor of South Carolina. He's the front runner for governor of South Carolina in 2026. So I don't think he's going to give people this kind of ammo. And also, in fairness to the AG, he does have a history of farming out cases with conflicts. In fact, he famously did so back in a political corruption trial involving some of his former political allies that he did send that off to prosecutor David Pasco. Now that got a little crazy after it was farmed off, but you know, he's got a history of doing this. So we'll keep an eye on it, but I fully expect him to farm this case out. And there are plenty of capable solicitors here that could handle it. While we talk about some cases, I know we're getting closer to the end of the show here. We got a few things we got to get to our political segment, but before we do that, let's kind of mix the criminal political here. big story that we've been following, the story of State Representative Marvin Pendarvis. This is a rising star, or was a rising star in South Carolina politics, a member of the Democratic Party, a lawyer, legislator, just a very well liked, up until recently, very respected young attorney. I've had dealings with him before, incredibly professional, brilliant lawyer, but he is mixed up in a massive scandal. And the gist of it is this: he settled a case without his client's knowledge, allegedly forged the client's signature on a document, did not tell them, and then when he was caught, attempted to bribe his way out of the problem. And all of this was documented in a lawsuit filed by Eric Bland and Ronnie Richter. And I tell you what, say what you want about those guys, but they brought the receipts on this case, and that lawsuit was just a hammer blow. But here's a question that we were asked. I think it's a good question. Why has Marvin Pendarvis not been removed from the legislature?
I feel like this goes back to the same exact thing we were just talking about with Becky. His boss are the constituents. Becky's boss are the people who put her into office. Marvin's boss are the people that put him into office. He's not obligated to resign his duties as a legislator because he's been sanctioned by the South Carolina bar or the Supreme Court. Nor is...
I mean, we have to remember that, he's been accused of this in a civil lawsuit. I mean, they brought the receipts, but it's an accusation. And there is a criminal investigation, but there have not been charges filed yet.
Yeah, that's a good point. However, we would point out, and this is interesting because he has been
suspended by the bar.
I mean, U.S. Senator Bob Melendez in New Jersey is facing prosecution by the U.S. Department of Justice and is a sitting senator, and he's facing prosecution for abusing his authorities as a U.S. senator to make backroom deals with foreign nations. I mean, if he's allowed to stay in the U.S. Senate, then I think Marvin, who is not accused of doing anything improprietous with his role as a legislator, should be allowed to stay in the House. And by the way, I think both of them have done some shady things if the allegations are true, but one does not equal the other, and the body has no real way to eject him for something like this.
Well, but the criminal investigation we are hearing, and in fact, we did a report on this shortly after the civil lawsuit dropped. The criminal investigation is not limited to Marvin Pendarvis, we are told. The bribery part of it in particular, we are told there are others that are being looked at in connection with that. So we are going to continue to follow that criminal investigation as well as whatever happens civilly. But here's the interesting thing, Jen. You mentioned earlier that he had his law license suspended by the South Carolina Supreme Court. And a lot of folks were kind of surprised at how quickly that happened. But one of the reasons, Jen, is we were checking the filings on the deadline because Pendarvis had a certain amount of time to respond to the complaint after he was sued. Where's the response?
There is none so far.
And if you don't respond by the deadline, guess what, folks? They assume it's all true. And apparently that may have been what the Supreme Court did. But we do hear that, and again, I haven't had this confirmed by Attorney Jim May, but a former federal prosecutor, really bright attorney, Jim May, reportedly has been referenced as a potential criminal lawyer for Pendarvis in the event he ever gets charged criminally. So we will try and keep our ear to the ground on that as that investigation moves forward. But since we're talking about politics, I want to get into this because we had some huge political news break just this week. And there's a Palmetto political consultant, his name is Michael Biondi. He had the best advice I've ever seen. As all this Trump stuff was breaking yesterday, he said, if you are running for office and you have a bad story, you've got dirt on yourself, drop it right now. Drop it right now. I think that's brilliant advice. But Andy, you're working on a political race with a little dirt, aren't you? And you can get a little ahead of yourself. Feel free. You don't have to save it for the website. What story are you working on? South Carolina politics.
Well, I don't want to tip anybody off to what we are actively investigating, but I will be very careful here in saying that we've got extremely credible sources. We have got photographic evidence indicating that someone's political career may end abruptly very soon.
Before it even really began, right?
Well, it depends on how many people are implicated.
Oh man, Andy, you know how to tease, man. You know how to tease, man. That's good.
Now I'm like, who is it?
So
Yes.
that's a state. We can at least tell people that's a state senate race, correct?
I would prefer not, but
Okay. Well, maybe it is.
But I guess
There we
if
go.
you are,
Little late.
Oops. Well, speaking of state senate races, though, Dylan, you've been covering what up until now, and we don't know what Andy's got up his sleeve, but up until now, Dylan, you've been covering the nastiest state senate race.
Did
in
you
the
see, by
entire-
the way, speaking of nasty, who was in our chat earlier at the beginning of this broadcast?
no.
Oh, one of the consultants in that race, Mr.
Right,
Slick.
right, who's quoted in my most recent story. For folks that don't know, down in the Low Country, a district that comprises some of Charleston and then some of going up 26, kind of into the Somerville area. There's a race between incumbent Senator Sandy Senn and current House Rep Matt Lieber, who is challenging her for her seat. It's interesting because it's not quite a straight incumbent versus challenger race, because some of the Senate district is Matt Lieber's current House district. And then through redistricting, a lot of this district has moved. So that means that this is more of a pitched battle than your typical challenger versus incumbent relationship. And things got really interesting when Senator Senn paid a PI to go up into North Carolina and just dig every ounce of dirt up about Matt Lieber's life that possibly could be dug. And he's been through the family court system. He's had allegations of domestic violence. There's a domestic violence protective order issued against him. And so she kind of fired the opening shot across the bow by putting together this website with his mugshots. You know, the website looks like it's a jail bars. It's, you know, as far as political art goes, this is a well done attack. Now, I did a big report where I dug into this, you know, okay, domestic violence protective order, that's certainly not a good thing. Nobody, you know, these situations are just terrible when there's kids involved. But you have to also then look, okay, as Rep. Lieber points out, he ended up with custody of his kids through the order of a court, or the custody of his daughter, rather, through the order of a court. So, you know, does this happen if there's a situation where the court feels there's abuse? I don't know, you know, but I made sure that in my story, I told both sides of this. I've also covered a debate where they talk about policy issues. Senator Senn is one of the sister senators. That's the grouping of, I believe, 5 female senators. I got that number correct, Will?
Yep.
In the South Carolina Senate, who, it's interesting because it's, you know, a group of some Republicans, some Democrats, but they generally vote, you know, they advocate for women's issues and very publicly do so. There's a documentary being produced. So this race is kind of characterized by somebody who, you know, Sandy Senn, who has not had a real primary challenger really in her political career, being attacked for not being far enough on the right in a district which has been redrawn to include a lot more of the rural areas. You know, so she once had this urban core where I think that she really didn't have a hard time cruising to victory, running as kind of a centrist Republican and governing as a centrist Republican. And in many ways, she, you know, she doesn't apologize for her record. She at the end of the day votes conservatively on the things that you absolutely have to as a Republican senator. But I don't think that anybody would say, and maybe not even her herself, that she is a policy champion on many of the issues that conservative primary voters care about. So it's been a real bloodbath, and it has gotten intensely personal. We were just talking about Chris Slick. He, you know, kind of overstepped things, and at one point was talking about how she looks like she has toilet caulking in her face because she has, you know, certainly seen a plastic surgeon or two over the years. He then went on to apologize for this, but you know, it's just it's gotten down in the mud. It's gotten ugly and personal.
Was it a real apology? Was it a real apology?
That was an interesting, you know, I was wondering, but apparently he went up to her, you know, one-on-one and had this apology, and you know, they talked it out face to face, and then he did a public apology. So I do think that it was a real apology that he actually made because he felt bad, and then she accepted. I don't think that he was trying to, you know, oh, I'm sorry for saying you're ugly, but just a way to, you know, say it again.
I'm sorry for saying you caulked your face. How do you say that?
Yeah, saying like she looks like she has toilet caulk in her face. Yeah. So yeah, this race, you know, early voting has started. I think this could go either way. All of these sister senators, by the way, are Republican ones at least, are facing challenges because of how they acted during the abortion debate. They definitely, a lot of them opened themselves up to attack. And I think that Senator Sen is probably the most vulnerable for that reason. And that's because she faces one strong challenger. You look at, the Midlands region where we are right now, Senator Katrina Shealy kind of finds herself in the same boat on that issue, but she's not facing one unified challenger. She's facing a handful. And I think that the fact that she's the incumbent facing a divided group of challengers is going to benefit her immensely. Senator Sen does not have that same advantage, and she's in a real dogfight here.
Well, and speaking of dogfights for South Carolina Senate seats, let's not forget it all comes back to Murdoch in this state. But the lead attorney for Alec Murdoch, Dick Harpootlian, state senator from Richland, he is in a race, a Democratic primary election against State Representative Russell Ott. This race, we don't know how close it's going to be. Russell Ott, kind of a moderate Democrat. I think if he were running as a Republican, he might have a shot in this district. It is a district that leans Democratic, but Dick Harpootlian has been hammering Russell Ott for being the only Democrat in the legislature to support these early bans on abortion, just wearing him out on billboards, on advertisements. And so I just don't know how you survive a Democratic primary being aggressively pro-life as Russell Ott has. And then Russell Ott, he kind of flip-flopped on this issue and then opposed the 20-week ban. And you think, okay, well, he's figured out he's running as a Democrat. But then he comes out on a radio show earlier this month and says, well, I'm actually for a 12-week ban for abortions. It's kind of like, dude, you flip-flop for nothing. What are you thinking? But anyway, obviously any race with Dick Harpootlian is going to be entertaining. My favorite part of this race, by the way, is actually the most effective criticism that Russell Ott has leveled against Dick Harpootlian was he or somebody on his team tweeted a video of Harpootlian at a black church in the Midlands attempting to show some soul, attempting to show some. I actually grilled Harpootlian about that video because he clearly had no soul, people. I mean, it was like negative soul on this senator. But
I didn't think you could call that an attempt.
I mean, I got some white boy rhythm, and I acknowledge that, but he has got way worse than me.
It was painful, but other than that, Harpootlian's been cruising. But I wanted to get now. We're coming to the close of the show. I wanted to get to. We are going to break some big political news here. All these races are very important. They're very entertaining. They're obviously incredibly well followed by the folks in these different districts, these Senate districts. But it is occurring against a broader backdrop. There is a battle for the first time, really, in Columbia. And again, this is a state where you had basically white Democrats who were the status quo for decades. It then became cool to be Republican. So a lot of these politicians switched labels, did not switch their governing philosophies. So now you kind of have a white Republican majority that's basically the same cronies as before. They switched party labels. They didn't really switch what they believe. But for the first time, they're being challenged by a group called the South Carolina Freedom Caucus. And I had a message that was sent to me ahead of the show, and I wanted to read it because it's interesting. It says, why does your media outlet defend the crazies in the Freedom Caucus? And I kind of wanted to address that because, we published just last week a huge guest column from Senator Tom Davis attacking the Freedom Caucus. I have attacked them and called them hypocrites on the issue of medical marijuana. In fact, I said, if you think you're a Freedom Caucus and you vote against medical marijuana, you don't know what freedom is. And obviously, we've run stories on the ads criticizing them. So I don't think we habitually and reflexively defend the Freedom Caucus, but I did want to say this because I've lived in South Carolina now for almost 50 years. Okay. And I've been in the political world of South Carolina for 2.5 decades. And I want to tell you that for the very first time, since I've either been alive or covering this stuff, for the very first time, we finally have a legitimate check and balance to the failed uniparty establishment in South Carolina. And this is an establishment that has created a crappy economy, crappy roads, crappier schools, a corrupt court system. This is a government that has produced absolutely terrible outcomes. And for the first time, and they've done it all while vacuuming billions of additional dollars out of your pockets if you're a South Carolina taxpayer. So yeah, for the first time, there is a legitimate check to that corrupt, ineffective form of governments. And so yeah, we have run some articles in support of them. And I do want to point out that South Carolina for 3 years running was judged the most uh, fiscally liberal Republican legislature in the country, in the entire country, until the Freedom Caucus came along. And so I'm a bottom line guy. And from where I sit, this group is good for the bottom line. So anyway, I'll say that.
And
But
Will, if I might jump in here, I mean, in an hour and a half, I'm going to be having a conversation with one of the members of the Freedom Caucus, who's one of the most vocal guys who will jump in during these floor debates, Representative Jordan Pace. This is something that I believe we're going to air next week. But I intend to come in, and I've been speaking with many of his legislative colleagues, just kind of saying, all right, what's the strongest version of your case against the Freedom Caucus? Folks who, obviously view them as disruptors, folks who don't like them. And I've gotten that, and I'm going to come back and push back and make sure that he's challenged, but obviously give him a place to explain his ideas. But I'm certainly going to say, okay, some people say that you're, quote unquote, legislative terrorist. You come in on the back end and you're not pushing for real policy. Rather, you're introducing frivolous amendments in the back end. What's your answer to this?
yeah.
Giving these people a voice, I think, is a great thing, but obviously we still challenge them.
Yeah, and the other thing, like you just said, giving them a voice. I mean, we talked earlier about the corrupt lawyer legislator who let the gang leader out with 15 years in the sentence. We had him in our studio and
Who
grilled
was
him
that
on it.
corrupt legislator?
Well, he knows who he is. He knows who he is, but I'm not going to say his name because then we'll have to invite him back. No, I'm kidding. We'd love to have
He's
Representative
a good
Todd.
time. Say what you will about Representative Rutherford. I mean, I enjoyed that interview immensely. Just getting to
Well, we'd love to have him back. He's always welcome here, and that's the whole point. Is that if you have an intelligent perspective on any of these issues, whether we agree with it, whether you're criticizing or attacking us, we'll share it. But I wanted to close. We're closing the show. We're going to break a little news here, but there is an election that is kind of a microcosm or a sort of a race that really epitomizes that uniparty versus Freedom Caucus battle, and it involves the chairman of the Freedom Caucus, State Representative Adam Morgan, who is challenging incumbent U.S. Congressman William Timmons up in South Carolina's 4th Congressional District, a very devoutly Republican district. But this is the first time that William Timmons has been seriously challenged. Timmons is an incredibly wealthy incumbent. He's in his 3rd term, going for his 4th term. He's been endorsed by Donald Trump. He has a lot of money behind him. In fact, he spent a lot of tax money on some ads in support of himself up there in Greenville. But a few years ago, Timmons, can I say he stepped on his own dick? I think we can say that figuratively. He launched his own sex scandal via an unsolicited 18-word statement that was delivered to this media out in the spring of 2002, in which he acknowledged an issue in his personal life, and that he asked for prayers and privacy. Well, a certain gentleman named Ron Rollis, who was the husband of the woman that Timmons was having an affair with, did not grant him his wish for privacy. In fact, he blew this story up to a level that we've never seen a political scandal like this, days of our Congressman saga. But as we were investigating this story, we found some property records. I think we said earlier in the show, it's always in the property records, but it involved some land that was deeded from William Timmons to his wife in exchange. Well, we don't know what it was in exchange for because the agreement was sealed. But this was a very valuable piece of property. It was deeded as part of what we were told was a confidential agreement. And we received just this week an email which confirms all of our reporting. And I'm going to read an excerpt from it here real quick. This is an email purportedly written by William Timmons. His campaign has been confronted with it. They are not disputing it. Our settlement agreement is secured by a piece of property I deeded to Sarah, and I have already substantially complied with my obligations under that agreement. Okay, well, what is the agreement? Well, here's where we get in the interesting part. We would both like to keep this out of the media, Timmons writes. Sarah mentioned you had a preferred venue that could facilitate that. Little cozy connection at the court. Would it be possible to file under our initials only and then have a hearing to request the case be sealed? So to clarify what he's asking here for, he's asking to file a case under their initials, and then at that hearing, they ask for the case to be sealed. It's an effort to keep this whole thing out of the public view. which to me is a cover up. But anyway, I put this question to the Timmons campaign this week because, we like to ask people, hey, you're being accused of this. This looks sketchy and shady. What do you think? The Timmons campaign responded with a quote from not a campaign spokesperson, not the congressman himself, but from Sarah Timmons, the woman at the heart of this scandal. So, and I want to quote it. William and I settled the matter of our marriage privately, and we remain on good terms. I am appalled that our previous relationship has now been weaponized by Adam Morgan and his supporters for political purposes. Adam Morgan is as unserious as he is ineffective. I fully support William for re-election and know that he is the best candidate to represent us in Washington. Adam has attacked women in his votes and even now selfishly attacks a woman for his gain. Adam Morgan is not fit to serve in office. Jen, let me ask you a question. If Rob messes up the way that William Timmons messes up, you going to issue that statement in support of his
if he gives me some property that is as valuable and lovely as the property Sarah Timmons got in this back room deal, I might say, yeah, I got you.
Wow. Okay, Jen Wood. We are living in a material world, people, and Jen Wood is a material girl.
Me, I'm just a whole lot of different.
Andy's got a thought on this.
Well, I'm just thinking. I mean, the ex-wife rears her head when it's convenient for Timmons. Because notice when Dylan and I went to that event up in Greenville, she conveniently couldn't make it because she had depositions. And then one thing that Ron Rallis pointed out was, okay, during the time frame of 12 to 1:30, did she really have depositions? That's not something we've been able to confirm or negate on our own time, but I'm glad that he brought that point up because she would have loved to have been there at the club that we were all sitting there that day. Just the smoke and screen dance, just it frustrates me here with this one. But hey, he saved Tiki Taco.
We did. We published a nice guest column. And again, open mic, folks. If you got supporters want to share your story, look, we'll publish it. That's kind of what we're here for. But so we'll have a story up at some point on this latest William Timmons development. By the way, I did check with Sarah Timmons directly. She confirmed that is in fact her statement. And so she's definitely standing by him as this race hits its home stretch. We are, by the way, just 11 days away from Election Day here in South Carolina, although we suspect 40 to 50% of votes could be cast early. This is the first real big early voting outpouring here in South Carolina, but keep it tuned here to FITSNews.com, not only for all the latest political news, we're obviously covering all these elections, all these scandals, but also all of the stories that we talked about earlier on this show, particularly the Micah Miller saga, the Rose Petal murder, so many of these, the Colucci retrial, so many of these stories, not only have we broke, but we have been driving the coverage ever since. It is all thanks to you. It is all thanks to your subscriptions that keep us going, empower everything we do here at FITSNews. So I just want to thank all of our subscribers and urge anyone who isn't a FITSNews.com subscriber, hop on over there today. Help us out. It's only $8 a month. Really helps us hold these entities accountable. But for Dylan Nolan, for Jen Wood, for Andy Fancher, for the entire news team here at FITSNews, I want to thank everybody for joining our third month in review. We hope we will catch you next time as we cover all these stories and continue to track all these scandals here in South Carolina. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time on the Month in Review.
We are off.